Here's Parks Associates' SmartTechCheck podcast with Mark Vina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, leader of the Parks Associates Smart Home Research Practice, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all consumer tech topics that are smart home, home automation, security, console gaming, and much, much more. Today's podcast is going to be a bit of a family affair. Joining me on today's podcast is the entertainment research team at Parks Associates, Paul Erickson and Liam Gaughan, Gaughan, I should say, research analysts at the with the Parks team. Also on the roster today for today's podcast is Steve Nason, who is the director of the entertainment research group here at Parks. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mark.
Glad you guys could join me today because the entertainment part of our practice is a lot of fun. Not to say that the smart home part is not fun, but this is very, very entertaining to me because, frankly, this is where everybody gets to laugh or smile and try to understand, where content is coming from, how people are utilizing it, how they're leveraging it, how they're accessing it. And we've got a terrific team that does an excellent job of providing really interesting insights based on Parks data. And what I'm going to do going forward with my podcast is I'm going to kick the meetings off with an interesting data point that I think will inspire some conversation. And this one's an interesting data point because this data point covers and addresses the notion of OTT service stacking. I want to defer to Steve to kind of provide some insight into that because it really demonstrates some interesting trends going forward. So, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple seconds just to kind of kick the podcast off because this is a very interesting data point to chat about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So if really any trend encapsulates what's going on in the OTT space, and by the way, for those who are not familiar with the acronym, OTT stands for over the top. A lot of folks call it streaming services, streaming video services, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney Plus, those types of services. What we're really finding out here is that back in Q1 of 2021, while COVID was still on, but some of the consumption started to level up, people were still stacking at really increasingly rapid rates, service subscriptions on top of each other, to where now nearly half of U.S. broadband households subscribe to 4 or more services. It's pretty astounding. It's nearly double the rate of just the year prior. So it's really interesting. It's a confluence of a lot of large services coming to the market over the last couple of years: Disney Plus, HBO Max, Discovery Plus, Paramount Plus, Peacock. And then also COVID, of course, where folks were homebound for long periods of time and they were consuming video and needed, many hours filled of entertainment. So they signed up and really haven't seen a shedding or leveling off of that. So this is just showing how popular OTT services are.
So, Steve, would this suggest that this whole notion of streaming services fatigue,
right?
You hear about that from time to time.
Yep.
That really hasn't happened, or is the way that's being manifested is really churn. People are changing.
Right. Yeah. They're service switching in a lot of cases. They're keeping most of the foundational services, so like a Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Disney Plus of the world, but they're swapping out a lot of their different services, and they continue to add on more niche services. I know we'll kind of get into talk about those ones that cover specific content categories or specific target groups. But yeah, it really has not slowed down. There's subscription fatigue. Folks have it throughout their home and the different services that they subscribe to. But yeah, an OTT does not slow down as of yet.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Paul and Liam, do you guys have any reaction to this data point, or presumably you agree with it? I like the it's what's remarkable to me is when you look back at it 5 years ago, you go back to 2016, and you look at where the data is today. That's a dramatic increase in the 4 or more services. I mean, that really is pretty dramatic. Wouldn't you agree with that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, normally I would say that that's anomalous, but I think this last year of the pandemic, even anomaly is normal, right? I mean, so we know how much time people have been forced to stay inside and amuse themselves, right? And for better or worse, most of the time that's connected entertainment. And so I think it's not inconceivable to begin with that people will try out all these different services. And plus we've seen kind of as Steve alluded to, all these different parties getting into having a streaming video service over the last year and a half to 2 years. Not even the last year. So you have a lot more options for consumers, where before they had to go to a single source, right, their pay TV operator, to get a lot of these things in one bundle. And now, with a lot of time inside, a lot of interest in consuming entertainment, and now with a lot of what used to be, different pieces of entertainment they would get from different places, ESPN, HBO, what have you. Okay, now they want to watch it, except just to accomplish that, they have to subscribe to 2, 3 services, beyond this now standard, more or less standard Netflix subscription that so many households have. So I was surprised by how much it went up, but I'm not surprised that it did go up.
Mm-hmm. And you know what's fascinating about this topic is that a lot of folks cut the cord to save money. And when you start, signing up for 3, 4, or 5 services, which now the data clearly shows that many people are, you can sometimes be spending more money for multiple subscriptions, combined versus a cable subscription. But then you don't have the flexibility, and you may not have the access to all the content you want, because a lot of these services are very niche oriented, and they, like anything else, they have very different personalities, and I think that plays a role in that. Liam, any of your thoughts on this before we go to our first topic?
Yeah, I think what Paul and Steve said was completely on point. I think that we saw so many households adopting certain OTT subscriptions during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we found that they're fairly satisfied with the service offerings that they were exposed to for the first time, so they decided to keep them. And like Steve and Paul have said, there's been so many major players entering the market. Like Discovery Plus had this massive rise in prominence after it launched in January, and I think we're seeing a lot more services aimed to become foundational. The services are aiming to be something like Netflix that is just a common subscription that most households have. So I think it'll be interesting to see which of these services end up actually becoming foundational and which ones are viewed that same way.
No, I like that word foundational, because that implies stickiness, and these services they like stickiness. They don't like churn. So with that, let's go to the first topic here that we have teed up today. And Paul, this is right in your wheelhouse, And by the way, Paul, I've never asked you this question. Are you a gamer? Do you play? I mean, are you?
I am currently not a gamer, but it's for a very particular gaming related reason, which is why I used to be an obsessive. It's because I used to be an obsessive gamer. Probably, well, that's well over, thank goodness, it's well over a decade ago. But yeah, there was a good, probably 5-year span where, probably 10-year span where I was into a lot of classic consoles, playing console games, and then started discovering multiplayer, then got into PC gaming and all these different things. And, I was one of those individuals where it was hard not to do it. So I had to step away from it. And I've been good. I haven't fallen back into it in, a decade or so. But, yeah, I mean, it's an easy subject for me to talk about because I'm so used to being in it deeply across multiple platforms, which is maybe a good segue into the topic where, playing really high quality games has been something that's normally been, I would say there's been a not segregation, that's not the right word, but there has been a bit of a bar there that's somewhat financially related, right? I mean, you either can afford a gaming PC or you can afford a $400 or $500 gaming console, or you can't, right? Or you have to buy something 2 generations ago, or what have you. And so cloud gaming is such an interesting topic because it potentially democratizes high quality gaming, or access to high quality gaming, to a lot more devices in the consumer landscape, many of which are far more affordable than your gaming PC, or your game console.
No, I think that point is spot on, because gaming in many respects was kind of the haves and have-nots if you go back a few years ago. If you really, people who are really serious gamers, folks are buying Dell XPS, Alienware, dual SLI, water cooled, $5,000 class systems, that's a fairly niche market. I mean, it's large, but it's not 50% of the gaming market. And I think the point you made that cloud gaming has the potential of becoming a very mainstream, affordable, the masses can access it. Now, the pushback that hardcore gamers will have is, well, you really can't get the same class of experience when you don't have the graphics power locally, on either an Xbox or a PlayStation 5 or a PC. So do you buy that argument, or do you think that ultimately cloud gaming will, rise the level of performance and quality that you see in a conventional hardware platform?
I think it's true, but it's just like it has to be put in context, right? Like water can be poisonous if you drink too much of it, right? So I think, yes, it's not going to perform as fast as if you had it playing on local hardware. And that's just a reality. There's going to be some latency there, et cetera. But again, you have to put it in context, right? I mean, compared to the game that somebody's playing on their smartphone on a normal basis, or someone might be trying to play on their streaming media player, that gaming experience that you're getting is so far beyond what would normally be accessible to them that just that slight amount of latency is still okay. And again, it's that difference, that lack of responsiveness, it may be super critical to the hardcore gamer or to the first-person shooter gamer, somebody where, like milliseconds count. But the people that are playing other types of games, or that maybe are not that hardcore, especially if they're playing role-playing games or playing something else where split-second differences aren't that crucial. They're just happy to have a much richer experience. And on top of that, maybe they would rather feel a $15 a month bite than a $500 or $1,500, or sorry, $500 or $1,000 bite for a brand new PS5 or a game PC.
Liam, you don't look like a gamer to me. I'm being sarcastic. You're not a gamer. I would have guessed between you and Steve that you would be a gamer.
No, I actually have never been a gamer, so.
Good for you, Liam. Don't get into it.
Well, I think there's addiction issues, frankly. But
I haven't played since Atari since I was 8 years old, just showing my age a little bit. So.
Oh wow. See, I go back just to date myself. I don't know if you folks remember Pong. Pong was the first.
Oh yeah.
It was the first. Well, it was sold by Sears, and it was licensed by Atari, of course. But that was unbelievable. I just remember going to the mall and just hanging out at the Sears and Roebuck, playing with that, and the manager trying to shoo us out of the department because you can't stay here for 7 hours. But so Liam, you're not a gamer, Steven, and what do you find interesting though about each of you? What do you find interesting about the gaming category in general? I mean, is there something intriguing?
Yeah, I can jump in there. Yeah. I mean, some people kind of separate out gaming and video services as people think of video, but I just think of gaming as another type of video streaming. It's a content category. Yes, there's active folks, there's people actually engaged in an activity, but you've had the explosion of things like esports, right? Actual competition, competitive gaming, where they have stadiums and arenas and live streams and huge sponsorships and professional players. It's a content category. People tune in for that. Even non-gamers tune in to esports. And then there's also a natural crossover, right? You've heard some news recently. Netflix is starting to dip their toes in the gaming, hiring a C-suite executive. We'll see what that turns out to be. Amazon, of course, has been in that space for a while, right? They own Twitch, which is one of the biggest video live streaming platforms, social network platforms for gamers. It's just a natural fit. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that moving forward.
Yeah, and Microsoft, they haven't unveiled their plans yet, but they've kind of hinted that they're going to do something with not a console, but outside of their Xbox stuff. They're going to do something with TVs to enable gaming on a TV. And I don't know whether that's an embedded play or whether it's some type of, I don't know, external device that you plug into, but they clearly are looking at TVs as a interesting platform for gaming, because I think they recognize at $600 a pop, even an Xbox is a considered purchase for a fairly significant portion of the population. And that to me is really interesting. And I'm very disappointed, Liam, that you're not a gamer, because I wanted to challenge you at something. But if you're not a gamer, why should I even do that? So before we get to the next topic, Liam, any commentary that you have on the gaming category?
Yeah, I would want to jump in on what Steve had brought up, which was that Netflix was considering, or not considering, getting into gaming pretty soon. And I think it's very interesting seeing the cross-brand marketing that a lot of these companies have. Obviously, as he mentioned, Amazon being involved in Twitch, Apple having Apple Arcade. I think we're going to see a lot more co-sponsorships between the video side and the gaming side. I think it would be only natural for Netflix to start developing gaming properties based on their most popular video properties. And so I think we're going to see a lot more integration between those two markets.
Interesting. Very, very interesting stuff. Let's flip on to the next topic we need to hit. And this is going to be very interesting, only because in many ways it's pandemic related, but this is the whole notion of the windowing of theatrical releases. Now, honestly, we're not officially out of the woods from a pandemic standpoint. Many of the studios are still releasing content both on, live, online, and also in theaters as the theaters start to come back. But Steve, was this your topic, if I'm not mistaken?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm sure you have an interesting opinion on this.
Yeah, so it's really all about the notion of, for many, many, many decades, all the way dating back as long as film has been around, there's always been a window that most, if not all, theatrical releases premiere actually in theater before they go off to digital sales, to physical media like DVDs, and then on to online services. Well, as you kind of teed up, COVID has not really invented a lot of trends. There has been some, but they've accelerated a ton of trends. And one of them is, before the pandemic, folks were not going to the theaters as much, except for really top shelf blockbusters. And a lot of people were going to the in-home entertainment experience to enjoy movies. Because, they're, and Paul can speak to this, their home theater is coming out more affordable. They can afford that 70-inch TV and the wonderful sound system, the sound bar and the surround sound and all that, to try to replicate the in-theater. But also because video services starting, Netflix, one that has eschewed the movie theaters a lot, the operators, by premiering their own titles on their service before theaters. And Amazon doing that as well, and others. So they've kind of jumbled up the whole process. And then COVID hit. Then you have Trolls World Tour, which is a brand new release going straight to video on demand services and being a huge hit. And then, of course, with the shutdown and movies being in the can, so to speak, that studios had to weigh. Do we hold on to that release? Do we push it back a year like they did with F9 that just released? Do they release it? Of course, they're not going to be in the theaters. The theaters are shuttered. So what do we do with it? So those that have direct-to-consumer services, studios that do, so we're talking about Warner Media or Warner Brothers, with HBO Max under Warner Media. We're talking about Disney with Disney Plus. We're talking about, now Paramount Pictures, with Paramount Plus. They have options to just premiere those titles directly on those platforms. On the flip side of that, of course, you have the theater operators. Of course, you're not going to be thrilled with that arrangement. And then you have the Hollywood talent, which during the pandemic, Christopher Nolan, famous director, said, you know what, Warner Media, if you're going to premiere all your 2021 titles in HBO Max and in the theaters, I don't want to work with you guys anymore. Yeah. So he said, bye-bye. Just recently, Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow just came out. She apparently is considering or has already filed a suit against Disney because, I think 60 million or so of the revenue for that picture, because it premiered on Premier Access, which is an add-on for Disney Plus subscribers. It generated about 60 million or so for Disney, and she wants a piece of that pie, and it's not in her contract because she's only tied to the box office. Right. So it's great for consumers. It's, I wouldn't say it's great for studios because they're still losing a lot of money because of the box office being unstable, but they're at least getting money. The movie theater operators obviously can be hurt by it. I'm not going to feel sorry for huge Hollywood talent, but of course they're missing out as well on a lot of that revenue. So it's really interesting. It just keeps It keeps evolving. There's different permutations of it, so it's a pretty fascinating topic.
It is a fascinating topic, and there was a great documentary. I think it's on Netflix or Hulu, but it's on the making of the movie Jaws, like the behind the scenes. And quite a bit of time was spent on the Jaws, which came out in 1975. For those of you who remember,
yes,
that movie really changed. Well, it certainly made the perception of sharks a lot different. But one of the big things it did was, it was released on the July 4th weekend back in 1975. And they decided to, a lot of movies back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s would not open up to nationwide audiences. It would open up in a region of the country, and it would start to spread, to different regions. And they made a decision because the feedback they had on the early screenings that it was going to be so popular that I want to say it debuted on 4,000 or 5,000 screens, which was an enormous number back in 1975. And now you flash back to 2021, and many in theater movies are always announced at 3 or 4 different very discrete dates during the year, because the movies are tied to promotional activities, because they spend more money sometimes promoting the movie than they did in actually producing it. But it's very interesting, this whole Scarlett Johansson thing, because I don't think she ever contemplated that a lot of the revenue would be generated when it got released online. And I think not to be a lawyer, because I am not a lawyer, but interesting. I can understand her.
Sure.
Hey, why am I not getting a piece of this? Liam, your thoughts on the topic? And tell me that you know the movie. Don't date yourself. Tell me that you know the movie Jaws, because if you don't know the movie Jaws, I'm ending the podcast right now.
Oh yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites. I love anything Spielberg's done. I think it'll be really interesting to see how studios kind of position their slates going forward. I think HBO Max has been following this year. They've got a very distinct strategy where they're going to have their major blockbuster films, the DC properties, and stuff that'll generate a significant amount of revenue go to theaters first. But a lot of these smaller titles that had a smaller chance at generating significant box office are going to head straight to the streaming service. And I think we're seeing that shortened theatrical window for a lot of these smaller films as well, because they don't have the expectations that something like Wonder Woman 1984 had to really become one of the major money makers for Warner Media that year. And it's been interesting seeing the different approaches that these studios had. Like Fast 9 is already on transactional services, and Paramount Plus is already the window for the theatrical releases was sort of shortened from what it traditionally was. Generally, it's around 180 days after film screen at theaters that it heads to streaming. And now already some of the titles from earlier this year, such as A Quiet Place Part 2, are already on their Paramount Plus service. So it's been interesting to see, because obviously these studios want to support their streaming arms, but they also want to be making the most off of the potentials for these films that they spent so much, the budgets are so high for, and that they never intended to debut directly to streaming. I think now that studios have that in mind, they're going to be developing more projects directly for the streaming market. Mm-hmm. So it'll be really interesting to see how they position their slates going forward.
Paul, your thoughts on the topic before we flip to the next one. Paul, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It is definitely Liam and Steve's more area of specialty, but I think for myself, the pandemic is an interesting change agent, right? So we think, as we see what happens in other industries, there's going to be a sussing out period where during the pandemic and post-pandemic, or at least, whatever's passing for post-pandemic now, that there's going to be some evaluation from some, very smart people on the financial side of the revenue difference between the different streams and the different channels through which it comes in. And eventually they'll figure out some medium, and at some point the contract law behind a lot of how that revenue is distributed to all the different members of the ecosystem will eventually follow. It all seems to lag, but I think they'll work it out. Now, whether that's a 6-month window or that's a 12 to 18-month window, by which everyone comes to terms and it's the accepted norm about how things are split between in theater and all the other out of theater revenue streams. I don't know how long that will take, but it will happen. There's just too much money involved for people not to work it out.
Right. Well, the only thing I'll say before we close this out, because I want to get to our last topic, is that the one community that really hasn't discovered these streaming of live events or streaming of content, even pre-recorded content in the entertainment field, is the Broadway theater. And and it's interesting to me, and Steve, this is a chat we should have offline, but what's interesting to me, because I'm growing up in New York, the professional theater has always been very concerned about recording their broadcast, because they figured someone who goes and can watch a recorded version of Wicked is not going to pay $50 or $100 to go see it in a live theater. And I think that conventional wisdom is wrong, honestly, because first of all, the theater, not many people can experience the theater unless you live in a big city across the country, or you live near, or you live in the tri-state area near Broadway. And to me, that's an interesting opportunity to kind of open up another element of the performing arts to just a section of the population that just doesn't get a chance to see great entertainment. So that's probably a podcast in itself. So let's flip on to the last topic in the few minutes we have left. And Liam, this is your topic: the appeal of horror content and niche over-the-top video market services. This is interesting. I just saw a trailer the other day. I went to a movie theater and I saw the movie Old. Is it Older or Old? A terrific movie, by the way. But that's orthogonal to this discussion. But I saw a trailer. They're coming out with another sequel to Halloween, which I cannot believe. I mean, how many sequels can you do about to Halloween? But that's a separate topic. So, Liam, let me let you address this one.
Well, yeah, I think that you had started off the podcast today with talking about the service stacking, and we're seeing service stacking for not just the main OTT services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Hulu, but we're also seeing a lot of markets kind of continue finding niche viewers. And we've seen sports content, we've seen British content has really exploded within the last few years. But I was really interested in the rise of horror content, because we've seen that a lot of the major services like Netflix and Amazon Prime Video have increased their options for horror content. But a lot of these niche services that are dedicated specifically to that have really become successful, particularly within the last year, with a lot of originals and exclusives. Right now, the leader of that market is this service Shudder from AMC, which is also in the AMC Plus bundle. And Shudder's just been getting a lot of original exclusive films. They've recently restored the classic film The Amusement Park, which had never previously been available for streaming or really available anywhere. And so that sort of original programming is something that generally you'd only see on one of these top line services. The fact that it's coming into a niche service and there's such a broad audience for these sort of markets, I think it's really interesting. And I think that we'll continue to see services like that. If there is a appeal, I think they can be really successful.
Steve, your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, first I'll say the word niche gets a niche. What do you say? It gets a bad rap because people think niche is small, but ESPN Plus has 15 million subscribers and it's a niche service.
Right.
Because it's typically just the one content category or target group. But yeah, niche services, as Liam kind of said, they kind of fill in the gaps in content. Some of the big guys, they've been trying to get into, more reality or nonfiction or even horror or sports. They're trying to pull in some of those niches, right, instead of being just all general entertainment. But these niche services really risen to the top and become very important during the pandemic and continue to be. Liam mentions AMC. I mean, they have the AMC bundle. They have All Black, which is African-American content. Used to be called Urban Movie Channel or UMC. You mentioned Shudder, the leading horror service. You have Sundance Now, which is kind of non-mainstream films, indie films that go to that. So all very IFC, Films Unlimited, another service that they all have under their umbrella. They're really filling in all these gaps. And they're not really trying to compete with the big guys. They're just for people that are wanting to get the specific type of content. They really fill that. And typically the prices are very, very low, much lower, $1, $2, $3 a month. Very affordable to add on to that stack if you're really into that particular content category.
Well, and my guess is, and Steve, you probably would know the answer to this, is that these niche services, and I think that you made a very, very good point. In the age of the internet, in the age of streaming, niche is not small. We're not talking about 100,000 users. We're talking about millions and millions of users. My guess is that the demographics of someone who subscribes to a niche service are probably very, very strong. I mean, in terms of advertising, and maybe it's a small, on the scale of things, it's a smaller audience, but
they're highly attractive.
Yes, from an advertising standpoint.
No doubt.
Paul, before we zero this one out, so to speak, any thoughts that you have? And I'm not going to ask you what your favorite horror movie is because your answer might scare me. But any thoughts on this topic before we?
It's The Exorcist, by the way. That's the only answer for the best horror movie. There's no horror movie on a level of the original Exorcist.
The original,
not the 10 remakes. The original.
Right.
Anyway,
go ahead.
I would say that. Yeah, no worries. Probably for horror or any other niche type of OTT content or niche type of OTT channel or service. Before OTT video over the internet was a realistic possibility, you might have to hunt through the 100 or several hundred channel list from your satellite provider, your cable provider, to find some particular specialty channel, and sometimes you would find them by accident. Mm-hmm. And I think these days. It's probably the best thing that could have happened for this genre. Specialty channels is the mass adoption of OTT video, just because it means that anybody that really gets that whim where they want to watch it, they can access it, right? Or they can pay that minimal fee per month to have access to horror, to dramas, to specialty ethnic content, whatever it is that they want. There's access to it, and I think that. The appeal is always going to be there. Certainly won't be the same, I think, aggregate appeal as something like a Netflix, as something like a Hulu. But I certainly think that there's a healthy number of people that are interested in some of these very distinct niches.
Well, this is a fascinating topic. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. So, Steve, Liam, and Paul, listen, thank you for taking the time to participate on the Smart Tech Check podcast. And to our viewing and listening audience, please subscribe to the Smart Tech Check podcast on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week.